Ever visited a home where the homeowner is clearly losing their mind? Forget taking off your shoes. We are talking about absolute psychological warfare disguised as hospitality. From aggressive bathroom mandates to terrifying kitchen rituals, some people run their homes like a maximum security asylum. Here are 50 of the most unhinged house rules guests actually had to follow. 1. Protecting a wooden coffee table is one thing, but this guy treated his furniture like a crime scene. Using a drink coaster here was a deeply confusing two-step procedure. You had to place your glass down first, and then carefully balance the actual coaster directly on top of your beverage. The homeowner fiercely insisted this was the only proven method to stop microscopic airborne dust particles from contaminating his iced tea. Honestly, treating a glass of lemonade like a hazardous biological sample really kills the weekend vibe. 2. Securing a simple glass of tap water required a higher security clearance than visiting the Pentagon. Guests were completely forbidden from fetching their own drinks. You had to formally request hydration from the host, who would then personally audit your glass for invisible impurities. But the true madness happened when he poured the water from a designated plastic pitcher that had to remain flawlessly aligned with the Earth's magnetic north. Apparently, off-axis water ruins your digestion. It was the most agonizingly bureaucratic beverage ever served to a human being. 3. Flipping off the lights usually requires zero brain power, unless you were the last person to exit a room in this specific household. You were legally bound by the host to hit the light switch using only your left elbow, not a finger, not a knuckle, and absolutely never the right elbow. He passionately argued that this bizarre gymnastics routine minimized the transfer of greasy skin oils and preserved the absolute sanctity of the light switch. Because nothing screams sacred religious artifact quite like a 50-cent piece of plastic from the hardware store. 4. Conversations in this wildly pretentious home required navigating a linguistic minefield where the word obvious was strictly outlawed. The homeowner, a deeply insufferable philosophy professor, operated on the belief that absolutely nothing in this vast universe was truly obvious. He claimed using that specific word proved you had a catastrophically lazy mind. You literally had to invent incredibly convoluted, 5-minute monologues just to agree that the sky was blue or that fire was hot. It was like living inside a painfully boring debate tournament you never signed up for. 5. The driveway at this residence was basically a psychological battleground. You were forced to park your vehicle so the front tires were flawlessly centered over one specific, practically invisible crack in the concrete. The host would actually march outside clutching a metal measuring tape to physically audit your alignment. This unhinged behavior had absolutely nothing to do with keeping things neat. He just knew that this exact parking angle would perfectly infuriate the neighbor who had to look at it all day long. That is not hospitality. That is purely weaponized parallel parking. 6. Whipping out your smartphone to snap a quick picture inside this house was treated like a federal crime. Guests were strictly forbidden from taking any photos, and it had zero to do with protecting their personal privacy. The homeowner genuinely believed that camera flashes were actively stealing tiny, irreplaceable fragments of the property's soul. So, you gotta leave with exactly zero photographic memories of your vacation. But at least the hallway drywall got to keep its spiritual integrity fully intact. Seems like a totally rational trade-off. 7. Stepping into this family's living room meant entering a terrifying alternate reality where bad news simply did not exist. They strictly enforced a militant positive vibes, only mandate that banned you from mentioning anything negative from the outside world. Did you just lose your job? Or maybe your car transmission exploded on the highway? Keep your mouth shut, because those topics were absolute contraband. This place was not a relaxing sanctuary. It was a delusional, suffocating bubble of aggressively forced optimism. Bottling up all that real-world trauma is absolutely exhausting. 8. Washing the dirt off your body in this guest bathroom came with mandatory manual labor. The exact second you turned off the water, you were required to grab a squeegee and wipe down every single surface in sight. We are not just talking about the glass door. You had to aggressively scrub the tiled walls, the chrome faucet, the shower head, and yes, the actual floor. The host even provided a laminated diagram to ensure perfect execution. It was a grueling cardiovascular workout that left you vastly more sweaty than before you bathed. 9. Spilling even a microscopic bead of liquid on this carpet was treated like a catastrophic nuclear meltdown. If a single drop of condensation fell from your glass, the host would violently sprint across the room, clutching a full hazmat-style cleanup kit. They would literally cordon off the spill zone and fiercely scrub the invisible spot for 10 straight minutes while breathing heavily. You very quickly learn to grip your iced tea with the terrified intensity of a bomb squad technician cutting the red wire. One wrong move, and the screaming started. 10. Heating up a frozen burrito required a strict cool-down protocol that defied all modern laws of physics. After using the kitchen microwave, you were forced to leave the appliance door hanging wide open for exactly 5 minutes to allow the agitated food molecules to properly settle. The homeowner was terrified that shutting the door too early would trap chaotic microwave energy inside the kitchen. As a result, you were constantly dodging an open metal door just trying to make a sandwich. It is amazing how people invent invisible enemies. 11. Scrubbing your back in this house came with a heavy dose of artistic censorship. There was an absolute ban on singing in the shower, but wildly enough, you were strongly encouraged to loudly recite poetry instead. The owner insisted that belting out pop songs was way too emotionally chaotic for the bathroom acoustics, whereas spoken word poetry provided a much more structurally sound auditory experience. Look, if me aggressively humming classic rock through a layer of shampoo ruins your fancy tiles, we have very different definitions of a relaxing morning. 12. Walking through the front door of this residence felt exactly like reporting for duty at a minimum security prison. Sitting right on the entryway table was a massive, leather-bound guest logbook. You were strictly required to sign your name, log the exact time, and detail the specific purpose of your excursion every single time you crossed the threshold. Going outside to grab a jacket from the car required a ton of unnecessary paperwork. It felt vastly less like visiting an old buddy and more like surviving a very lenient parole program. 13. Attempting to interact with a family dog required completely abandoning your personal dignity. This was not a tiny poodle, it was a massive, muscle-bound, 120-pound Rottweiler capable of destroying a cinder block. Yet, all communication with this beast had to be delivered in a painfully high-pitched, squeaky baby voice. You could not just command him to sit. You had to look this apex predator in the eyes and ask if the whittle sweetie pie wanted a yummy tweet. Watching grown men degrade themselves for a guard dog is deeply scarring. 14. Surviving a snack break with this host meant indulging their deeply unhinged obsession with visual symmetry. If you reached into the kitchen jar and grabbed a chocolate chip cookie from the left side, you were violently pressured into taking a second one from the exact opposite side just to maintain the aesthetic balance. This terrifying rule applied to absolutely everything, from fluffing decorative couch pillows to how your mashed potatoes were distributed on a dinner plate. It was an absolute psychological nightmare for anyone who simply wanted to eat one cookie in peace. 15. Taking off your footwear at this house involved an absurd decontamination ritual that tested your patience. You were absolutely not allowed to bring your shoes inside the home. Instead, you had to abandon them outdoors in a designated wooden shoe quarantine box for a mandatory 1-hour waiting period before they could even be moved into the garage. The homeowner passionately argued this process was vital to de-energize the leather from the toxic stresses of the outside world. Because apparently your sneakers are just soaking up bad vibes from the grocery store. 16. Checking your hair in the powder room mirror came with a very strict 5-second time limit. The host harbored a completely insane science fiction belief that staring at your own reflection for too long would accidentally invite an evil doppelganger from a dark alternate dimension right into their hallway. If you needed to shave or apply makeup, you had to do it in extremely rapid panicked bursts while looking away every few seconds. Honestly, if their interdimensional security system can be entirely defeated by a piece of glass, they have bigger problems. 17. Surviving the night shift in this home meant turning into a theatrical ninja. The host demanded that all guests physically walk on their tiptoes the absolute second the grandfather clock struck 10. They did not just want you to be quiet, they wanted full ballerina stealth. The craziest part is the reason had nothing to do with waking up human beings. They claimed normal footsteps would disturb the ancient slumber of the hardwood floorboards. Meanwhile, their giant dog was fully allowed to sprint down the hallway barking like a lunatic. 18. Having a casual chat in this living room required a mental thesaurus and a massive amount of patience. The completely harmless word stuff was aggressively banned from all vocabulary. You could not say you were grabbing your stuff, or ask what that sticky stuff was on the counter. The host, a wildly unsuccessful amateur poet, declared the word was intellectually lazy and a literal crime against the English language. You constantly found yourself mentally sweating, trying to invent 12 different fancy synonyms for random garbage just to survive a simple breakfast. 19. Powering up your electronics at night felt like dealing with a paranoid conspiracy theorist. All cell phones had to be plugged into one heavily guarded charging station out in the main hallway. You were strictly forbidden from juicing up your device anywhere near a mattress. The host was deeply convinced that charging a phone in the same room where you sleep aggressively scrambles your brain's natural electrical field. So, you had to stumble blindly into the dark hallway at 3 in the morning just to check what time it was. 20. Throwing away a simple candy wrapper required passing a high-pressure municipal exam. The kitchen was equipped with an intimidating lineup of 5 drastically different garbage bins, and you were forced to pass a rapid-fire verbal quiz before dropping anything inside. If you accidentally misidentified the recycling grade of a yogurt container, you were instantly subjected to a brutal, condescending lecture about the subtle nuances of consumer plastics. After day 2, it was honestly just infinitely easier to stuff all your dirty napkins deep into your jeans pockets and smuggle them out. 21. Walking across the carpet in this house required a footwear setup that completely destroyed your self-esteem. The family mandated that all visitors wear a specific pair of brightly colored, house-provided Crocs at all times. But the absolute worst part was, you had to jam them on directly over your own street shoes. You ended up awkwardly clomping around the kitchen with your expensive sneakers violently stuffed inside giant, squeaky plastic clogs. It was a horrifying fashion statement that loudly announced to the world that you had completely surrendered all control. 22. Trying to get clean in this guest bathroom was a high-stress race against the clock. Showers were ruthlessly timed to exactly 2 minutes, with 0 exceptions for thick hair. The host would literally stand right outside the wooden door clutching a digital stopwatch, aggressively knocking to issue a terrifying 30-second warning. It felt exactly like being trapped in a punishing military boot camp, except the water pressure was absolute garbage, and the drill sergeant was just a really creepy guy who watched way too much morning television. 23. Enjoying a cold beverage in this home required insane upper body endurance. There was an absolutely ironclad rule forbidding anyone from placing a drinking glass directly onto any flat surface. We are not just talking about antique wooden tables. You could not even set a mug on the granite kitchen counter. You were forced to physically hold your drink in your hand for hours, unless you dumped it in the sink. The host passionately claimed that coasters were just a pathetic crutch for careless people. Apparently, relentless hand cramps build character. 24. Walking down the main hallway came with a mandatory toll of psychological manipulation. Every single time you passed this hideously ugly, lopsided ceramic vase, you were legally obligated to stop and say something incredibly nice about it out loud. The host's late grandmother had sculpted the monstrosity, and the family genuinely believed the inanimate clay object aggressively thrived on verbal positive affirmations. So, 4 times a day, you would find yourself awkwardly staring at a brown lump of dirt, muttering things like, "You are looking really sharp today, vase." 25. Crossing the threshold of this house meant immediately washing away your entire identity. The host demanded that every single guest march straight to the bathroom to take a mandatory scent-neutralizing shower using his wildly abrasive, unscented medical soap. He had painstakingly curated the ambient aroma of his living room and viewed any outside deodorant or perfume as a direct olfactory aggressor. You literally had to scrub off your own personal scent profile just to sit on his couch and watch television. It was like going through decontamination before entering a laboratory. 26. Escaping the dinner table was impossible until you completed a mandatory arts and crafts project. Before anyone was allowed to stand up, you had to take your heavily used cloth napkin and perfectly fold it into the intricate shape of a swan. If your origami skills were lacking, the host would happily deliver a painfully condescending, hands-on tutorial while your dessert got cold. There is absolutely nothing that screams high-class fine dining quite like aggressively wrestling with a greasy, marinara-stained piece of fabric while the entire room silently judges you. 27. Unpacking your bags in the guest bedroom was strictly forbidden by a host who clearly misunderstood basic science. You could not drape a shirt over a chair or leave a single sock on the carpet. Every piece of fabric you owned had to remain securely zipped inside your heavy luggage at all times. The paranoid homeowner insisted this exhausting rule prevented your clothes from shedding toxic personal energy signatures all over their pristine antique furniture. So, your rolling suitcase basically became a makeshift prison designed to trap your soul's chaotic vibrations. 28. Having a casual chat over breakfast felt like auditioning for a Victorian stage play. The homeowner enforced a deeply psychotic rule banning the use of all linguistic contractions. You were completely forbidden from uttering words like cannot, do not, or it is not. You had to aggressively enunciate every single syllable of every sentence. He smugly claimed this agonizing habit promoted crystal-clear thinking and vastly superior intellect. But in reality, it just forced everyone in the room to sound exactly like a malfunctioning, depressed robot trying to blend in. 29. Trying to communicate with the host's elderly, half-deaf grandmother required participating in a bizarre theatrical performance. You were absolutely not allowed to raise your voice so she could actually hear you. Instead, you had to speak at a totally normal volume directly into a heavy, vintage metal microphone from the 1950s that the host would randomly hand you. He fiercely insisted the metal casing naturally focused the sonic vibrations toward her ears, despite the fact that it was literally not plugged into a single thing. It was just pure delusion. 30. Sitting around the fire pit with this family was like living inside a heavily medicated children's cartoon. They enforced a militant conversation policy where you were only legally allowed to tell stories that ended happily. If you even started to recount a mildly frustrating day at the bank, the host would aggressively interrupt you, clap his hands and scream, "Let us skip to the good part." It brutally transformed every single adult interaction into a heavily censored, terrifyingly optimistic version of reality where nobody was ever allowed to be sad. 31. Washing your hands in this downstairs powder room was a masterclass in aggressive interior design deception. Guests were fiercely warned never to dry their wet hands on the beautiful plush towels hanging right next to the sink. Instead, you were forced to waddle out into the hallway dripping water everywhere to find a hidden roll of cheap paper towels stashed in a dark closet. The luxurious bathroom towels were purely structural elements, completely off-limits to actual filthy human hands. Heaven forbid a functional piece of cotton actually absorbs a drop of moisture. 32. Attending a dinner party at this house felt like taking a standardized test you definitely did not study for. As you sat down, you were handed a literal index card containing the only 3 officially approved topics for the evening. You were trapped discussing 19th century European architecture, the seasonal migratory patterns of Canadian geese, and the host's wildly uneventful business trip to Ohio. If you dared to mention a movie you just saw, you were met with a terrifying dead-eyed silence until someone aggressively steered the chat back to the geese. 33. Doing a quick load of wash in this basement laundry room required absolute visual discipline. If you happened to walk down the stairs while the homeowner was pulling her delicate garments out of the dryer, you were commanded to aggressively avert your gaze. You were treated like a peasant looking directly at a medieval king. You absolutely could not, under any threat of punishment, make eye contact with her cotton underwear. It was without a doubt the most awkward, deeply silent, and bizarrely tense laundry folding experience a human being could ever endure. 34. Sitting down for dinner with this family meant fully embracing absolute culinary insanity. They operated under a strict house mandate that completely banned the consumption of any food shaped like a circle. That meant absolutely no green peas, 0 meatballs, and a tragic ban on M&Ms. They possessed a deeply unhinged scientific belief that spherical objects rolled through your digestive tract way too fast, totally preventing you from absorbing vital nutrients. So, every single meal had to be aggressively chopped into tiny squares with sharp, highly inefficient corners. 35. Going for a casual afternoon swim in the backyard pool required surviving a brutal torture method first. Before your big toe could even touch the chlorine, guests were violently forced to dunk their entire head into a metal bucket of freezing ice water for 10 excruciating seconds. The homeowner, an overly intense former high school athlete, aggressively claimed this trauma properly acclimated your cranium to the incoming temperature shift. It honestly felt vastly less like a reasonable health and safety measure and a whole lot more like an illegal fraternity hazing ritual. 36. Grabbing a midnight snack from the fridge required navigating a sacred historical monument. You were sternly warned under penalty of eviction to never, ever touch the colorful alphabet magnets stuck to the metal door. The host had painstakingly arranged the plastic letters into a hyper-accurate, to-scale diorama, representing the bloody Battle of Gettysburg. Nudging a single letter B a quarter of an inch to the left was treated as a massive sign of disrespect to the fallen Union soldiers. And honestly, probably deeply insulting to the structural integrity of the plastic magnets. 37. Spending the night in this guest bedroom meant getting absolutely zero actual rest. You were strictly forbidden from sliding underneath the plush comforter and warm blankets. Instead, you were forced to sleep right on top of the perfectly made bed, shivering under a single, painfully thin sheet provided by the host. This exhausting rule was entirely designed to keep the main decorative bedding perfectly pristine and totally free of your filthy human wrinkles. You did not feel like an honored guest, you felt like a sweaty human doily placed there for decoration. 38. Trying to relax in this living room required a total mastery of anti-gravity physics. The massively expensive couch cushions were explicitly designated for visual decorative purposes only. The host actually stood there and instructed guests to never sit in a manner that would dent, depress, or otherwise displace the precious fabric. You essentially had to tighten your core and awkwardly levitate 3 inches above the sofa just to watch a baseball game. It was significantly less of a cozy family living room and much more of a high-security museum showroom. 39. Buttering a simple piece of morning toast required strict geographical precision. The glass butter dish sitting on the table came with a deeply psychotic territorial rule. Guests were only legally allowed to scrape butter off the extreme right side of the stick. The entire left half was reserved exclusively for the man of the house. He passionately claimed with a straight face that he could physically taste the dark kinetic energy left behind by other people's knife strokes. So he got half the butter, and humanity fought over the rest. 40. Staying the weekend at this house meant surviving a terrifying hygiene crisis. The host proudly handed you one single, incredibly tiny hand towel to use for your entire 3-day visit. You were expected to use this tiny square of fabric to dry your hands, wipe your face, and aggressively mop up your entire body after a wet shower. When politely begging for a fresh one, the host smugly insisted the rag was woven from a special antimicrobial fabric. Apparently, this magical cloth could completely defy the basic laws of physics and water retention. 41. Using the bathroom at this house required strategic biological planning. The host enforced a strict 1 flush per day policy for guests, regardless of what absolute horrors you left in the bowl. He claimed the municipal plumbing system needed adequate time to emotionally recover between aggressive water surges. You literally had to calculate your internal digestion schedule just to avoid being the guy who broke the 1 flush rule. Having to stare at your own morning mistakes until sunset is a psychological torture method that the Geneva Conventions definitely overlooked. 42. Showing basic gratitude in this dining room required the linguistic skills of a corporate lawyer. You could never just casually smile and say the chicken was delicious. The host mandated a strict rule where every single compliment had to be formally delivered as a highly structured 3-part thesis statement. You actually had to sit up straight and declare that the visual presentation was excellent, the aroma was delightful, and the texture was superb. It violently transformed every single kind gesture into a stiff, incredibly awkward robotic declaration. 43. Securing a cold drink in this kitchen felt like breaking into a high-tech espionage facility. Every single time you grabbed the handle of the stainless steel refrigerator, you were forced to hum a very specific, aggressive 2-note melody out loud. The unhinged homeowner genuinely believed this vocal exercise acted as a secure sonic password that let the appliance know you were a friendly ally and not an invading foe. You had to perform this humiliating ritual just to grab a bottle of water. I am fairly confident the fridge did not care. 44. Browsing a piece of casual reading material in this living room was a massive logistical mistake. The absolute second you finished flipping through a magazine, you had to place it back onto the glass coffee table with the spine perfectly aligned to the table's edge and the cover strictly facing true north. I am not joking, the host actually whipped out a digital compass app on his smartphone just to officially verify your magnetic alignment. It did not feel like a relaxing place to sit. It felt like a heavily guarded library. 45. Eating a heavily prepared meal with this guy felt like participating in a bizarre biological cult. You were legally required to chew every single bite of food exactly 32 times before swallowing. If you gulped down a piece of steak too early, the host would violently slam his hands on the table and accuse you of disrespecting the cow's ultimate sacrifice. He would literally sit across from you, silently mouthing the numbers while making aggressive, unblinking eye contact. Dinner felt less like a meal and more like a hostage situation. 46. Trying to get comfortable in this living room required a total mastery of your own joints. Guests were strictly forbidden from ever crossing their legs while seated on the couch. The unhinged homeowner genuinely believed that crossing your ankles or knees violently blocked your root chakra from communicating with the basement's natural energy field. So you just had to sit there for 3 hours with both feet planted firmly on the rug like an obedient toddler waiting to be called into the principal's office. 47. Keeping the peace in this household meant keeping your hands completely silent. There was a zero-tolerance, heavily enforced policy against any form of finger snapping. The host's incredibly nervous poodle had endured some sort of dark, traumatic puppyhood experience and now strongly associated that specific clicking sound with the literal end of the world. A single accidental snap of your fingers to the beat of a song would send this curly-haired beast into a devastating howling frenzy, and you would be aggressively blamed for triggering a dog's crippling existential dread. 48. Surviving an incoming phone call in this living room was like participating in the most stressful game of musical chairs ever invented. The absolute second the landline rang, every single guest was forced to instantly stop moving, lock their joints, and stand perfectly silent like a frozen statue until the conversation fully concluded. The host demanded this theatrical performance as a sacred sign of deep respect for the telephone call. You had to hold your breath even if you were all the way across the house. It was a bizarre dictatorship. 49. Watching evening television with this guy required filing a formal petition just to change the channel. The plastic remote control was strictly kept off limits to all human guests. The host proudly referred to himself as the supreme curator of the audio-visual experience. If you wanted to watch the baseball game, you had to submit a highly respectful verbal request. He would then quietly consider your plea, intensely weigh its merits against his own strict viewing schedule, and eventually deliver his final ruling. Sitting on his couch was basically a hostage negotiation. 50. Leaving this terrifying residence required pulling off a bizarre physical stunt. When it was finally time to say your goodbyes, you were completely banned from simply turning around and walking out the front door. The host demanded that all guests physically walk backward over the threshold and down the front steps. He intensely claimed that turning your back on the house deeply insulted the protective spirits living in the drywall. Trying not to trip into the bushes while a grown man watches your face is the perfect way to end a weekend. Let's be brutally honest. If someone handed you a stopwatch for the shower, are you complying or flooding their bathroom out of spite? Tell me your absolute worst houseguest horror story in the comments below. Do not hold back. If watching these lunatics raised your blood pressure even a little bit, destroy the like button and subscribe so you don't miss our next breakdown.